Well, we now come to the concluding session, and they say perhaps this could just be the icing on the cake. So those who might not know Mr. Kishan Verma well, Mr. Kishan Verma is a former director of the Aviation Research Center and Special Secretary to the Government of India in the Cabinet Secretariat. During an illustrious career spanning 35 years, he has held several key appointments within India and abroad. He has held sensitive assignments in politically and socially fragile, militancy-affected border regions of J&K and India's northeast. Mr. Verma's diplomatic assignments include postings to countries in South Asia and the United States. His areas of specialization are China, the Far East, the Koreas, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific and the Indian Ocean region. Mr. Verma closely follows developments in South Asia and Africa from an economics and security perspective. He has practical experience in dealing with multifaceted security challenges, international terrorism, and global issues pertaining to energy security, trade and commerce, science and technology. He is the recipient of awards for distinguished and meritorious service from the Prime Minister of India. And currently, Mr. Verma serves on the board and in an advisory capacity to several corporate entities in the field of defense, cybersecurity, nuclear energy, and finance. It's a pleasure having you here, and it's a pleasure handing it over to you to chair. We look forward to a stimulating discussion. Mr. Verma.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Nair, for that very generous introduction. Good afternoon, all on the panel and my distinguished co-panelists. It's a matter of honor, in fact, and a privilege to be chairing as well as moderating this very useful discussion as it will unfold, I'm sure. When I first saw the name on the panel, and I said, well, you have saved the best for the last. And I think Mr. Nair did mention that. But having seen the scholarship that has preceded us, I shouldn't make a slight at all those presenters. I think there'll be some superb, excellent, insightful presentations through the yesterday and most of today. Therefore, I think I would just say that last but not least, I think this panel discussion will provide an insight into why we think the Chinese are where they are, what actually brings them there. I'll try to give a contextual framework to their doctrine about the Indian Ocean region as to how they are there, as well as try and enumerate and encapsulate the kind of concerns that they have, why are they, and how they're trying to meet these. And then lastly, talk about India's concerns and then India's options in this regard. Before I launch into my presentation, let me also thank the Institute of Contemporary Studies, Bangalore, Chennai Center for China Studies, and the Press Institute of India for inviting me to speak on this very, very important and very timely forum. So without further ado, let me get into this. I presume, Mr. Nair, that we have about 15 minutes each, and then we go in for question and answers. So I'm just going by that format. If you want me to sort of curtail at any given time, somebody just has to intervene and let me know.
Please feel free, Mr. Verma. There's no problem. 15 minutes is fine.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for your indulgence. Let me start by a little bit of a historical perspective on China. We saw the first ambition, the aspirations of being a maritime power way back in the 15th century, when Admiral Cheng He launched on his voyages across the Indian Ocean, and in fact visited in Andaman and Nicobar, and then came away to many, many countries in the Indian Ocean region. It had global ambitions of a maritime power. But for the next 200 years odd, they became closeted. They started looking inwards. They were riddled with internecine warfare. There were countries which actually came in, invaded China, and they went through a lot of turmoil, and they became inward looking. We see them coming back into this after about, for the last 3 decades, when they've made a very clear indication about their deep and expanded interest in the Indian Ocean. And this is not only as far as commercial interests are concerned, because about 90% of the energies flow through the Indian Ocean, but it's also enhancing a PLA, a military presence in the Indian Ocean region. Now, this has not happened just out of the blue in the last 3 decades. There has been a contextual framework which has come about. They have actually, as I mentioned earlier, a doctrine which has slowly unraveled. And I'm going to come out with a couple of excerpts of the defense white papers that they had come out, that they had actually made public during this period. The first one that we saw, the China's first defense white paper that was released in 1998, reflected limited naval ambitions and took pains to note that China does not station any troops or set up any military bases in any foreign country. In fact, President Hu Jintao appended and enlarged the scope of the Navy's ambitions in a speech to the Central Military Commission in 2004, in which he charged the PLA with defending China's expanding national interests and safeguarding world peace. These newly publicly articulated missions foreshadowed a more ambitious and active expeditionary role for the Navy. The 2006 Defense White Paper noted the rise of security-related issues pertaining to energy and international shipping routes, and the 2008 paper sharpened China's public focus on a rising global competition for resources and expressed the need for the PLAN to have the capability to conduct cooperation in distant waters. Following this, in 2008, the PLAN began a series of counter-piracy deployments in the Gulf of Aden, which it has continued almost without interruption to the present day. These deployments have involved a regular rotation of service vessels and occasionally conventional and nuclear attack submarines as well. The PLN has used more than a decade of such deployments to develop its blue water logistics capabilities and justify its military presence far from Chinese shores. Subsequent Chinese defense white papers continue to gradually expand the public ambit and specificity of the PLAN's ambitions. The 2010 paper highlighted the importance of logistic support for out-of-area activities. The 2013 paper noted explicitly the development of blue water capabilities and listed specific missions, such as protecting merchant vessels, evacuating Chinese citizens abroad, and providing reliable security support for Chinese interests overseas. I think the most important one was in 2015, the white paper, when it actually delineated 8 strategic tasks for the PLA. I'm going to read them out, I'm quoting. Effectively safeguard the sovereignty and security in China's territorial land, air, and sea. Resolutely defend the unification of the motherland. Safeguard China's security and interests in new domains. Safeguard the security of China's overseas interests. Maintain strategic deterrence and carry out nuclear counterattack. Participate in regional and international security cooperation and maintain regional and world peace. Strengthen efforts in operational against infiltration, separatism, and terrorism. And perform such tasks as emergency rescue and disaster relief, rights and interests protection, guard duties, and support for national economic and social development. Subsequent defense documents released in 2017 and 2019 expounded on these themes and did so. They seem designed to support the narrative vision of the Belt and Road Initiative, giving particular emphasis to the PLA's role in protecting Chinese interests and citizens overseas. It is possible to discern several broad objectives that drive Chinese military presence in the region, securing key sources of energy, protecting overseas investments and citizens, bolstering China's reputation and political influence, and maintaining strategic deterrence. I am now going to go into quoting a paper which I saw, which was, I thought, a very, very insightful paper by Joshua White, recently released. He actually talks about and elaborates on most of these themes. He says, the PLA, in developing an array of military platforms that due to the endurance and defensive capabilities are likely to be utilized in the Indian Ocean region. The first aircraft carrier, the LIAONING in 2012, and its ongoing indigenous carrier program, perhaps the most significant contribution to the PLAN out-of-area capabilities has come from the rapid development of other major surface combatants, many of which have already been deployed in the Indian Ocean region. These include guided missile cruisers, destroyers, frigates. The PLAN has also brought 6 large amphibious transport docks that can house 4 air-cushioned landing craft and 4 helicopters, and is building a fleet of even larger amphibious assault ships that can carry over 2 dozen helicopters to undertake sustained missions in the IOR. For replenishment and auxiliary vessels, including oilers, salvage and rescue ships, hospital ships and transport vessels have been brought in. PLAN submarine fleet, which is heavily geared towards anti-surface and land attack missiles, has also slated to grow. Both conventional and nuclear-powered submarines have undertaken patrols in the Indian Ocean and made port calls at friendly countries. The PLA is investing in enablers to support specific overseas missions in the Indian Ocean region. The PLF presently has limited expeditionary capabilities, but is expanding its long-range airlift fleet that has episodically, for humanitarian assistance, been used and for disaster relief operations, just as we saw in Libya in 2011, and exercise engagements with foreign militaries. There are security cooperation and strategic investments which the Chinese have also made. It has increased its military-related engagements with countries in the IOR. Data show that the PLA's engagements in Asia began a steep annual rise in 2012. Its aggregate number of outbound naval port calls, apart from those related to counter-piracy task force, began rising dramatically in 2013, and international military exercises began a similar trend in 2014. These trend lines similarly apply for the PLA's engagements specifically in the Indian Ocean region. One of the more notable movements on this sphere was the pair of submarine visits to Colombo in 2014, the first visit to the region by a Chinese nuclear-powered submarine, which made a port call to Karachi in 2016, and the presence of a sizable PLAN surface and submarine presence operating in the Indian Ocean as the Sino-Indian Doklam crisis unfolded in the summer of 2017. China's most robust military relations, as we all know, in the IOR is with Pakistan. I'm not going to delve very much into the details of this. I think all of us here are well aware of all the inroads that they've made into that sphere. But suffice it to say that as part of the multi-billion-dollar China-Pakistan economic corridor, Beijing has helped to build the Pakistan's fiber optic infrastructure, and this has provided grants and loans to develop the remote deep water port at Gwadar. It can also use Karachi as need. Bangladesh is the other littoral country which it has focused interest on. It is, we all know what it has done. It is already building some naval port facilities in that area. It has been supplying military equipment and engaging the countries in a formal defense cooperation partner, and become a leading defense supplier. It has purchased submarine, jet trainers and other major equipment, as well as small arms from China. Their military personnel train and exercise together, and the Bangladesh military has deepened ties with the PLA, even as it has sought to assuage its neighbor India that China will not be given a strategic foothold in the Bay of Bengal. It has reportedly declined several Chinese offers to develop ports with more strategic potential. Other than Pakistan and Bangladesh, we know that Sri Lanka, the Chinese are investing a lot of money in trying to build up a more robust relationship. It has used Colombo as an occasional port of call. The two militaries have engaged in joint exercises, and the PLA has donated a frigate to the Sri Lankan Navy and is constructing facilities at the Sri Lankan Military Academy. There is significant Chinese investment, including commercial development of the Colombo port and a controversial 99-year lease of Hambantota port to a Chinese state-owned enterprise. With the Maldives, it has also been an area of interest for the Chinese. They have been there and established some listening station, as we hear. They've also gone to Seychelles. They are also in Mauritius, and they've also built some facilities in Djibouti. Myanmar is also an important part of the littoral outreach for the Chinese. It has seen a major focus of China's BRI efforts as part of the so-called China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. China has proposed significant investments in oil and gas pipelines that would link its Yunnan province and with the Bay of Bengal, terminating at a deep water port at Chongqing. PLA's mission in the kind of activities that it is taking in that region, in the Indian Ocean region, if I could sort of bring it into just some points. I'm not going to go into detail of each of these points. We could save it for the Q&A, and perhaps the audience is well aware of these, but I'll just put them together just to give a little focus. The objectives of the presence of the Chinese in the Indian Ocean region is to conduct non-combatant activities focused on protecting Chinese citizens and investments, as for bolstering China's soft power influence, undertake counter-terrorism activities unilaterally with partners against organizations that threaten China, collect intelligence in support of operational requirements and against key adversaries, support efforts aimed at coercive diplomacy towards small countries in the region, and lastly, enable effective operations in a conflict environment, namely the ability to deter, mitigate, or terminate a state-sponsored interdiction of trade bound for China, and to meaningfully hold at risk US or Indian assets in the event of a wider conflict. Let me now move on to some of the concerns the Chinese have. I think we can only get a holistic picture of what the reasons for their presence in the Indian Ocean. I'm going to put them in sort of bullet points so it becomes a little easier for us to assimilate. I think it's very concerned of, first of all, of India's geographic location, the peninsular nature of our geography, the locational threat that India poses in terms of being able to interdict Chinese trade and energy routes. Indian naval activity beyond the Malacca Straits into the South China Seas and the Western Pacific region has also been a cause of concern for the Chinese. As one PLA general said, and I quote, "India is trying to jump out of the South Asian bath into the Indian Ocean region." A concern over the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, located at the mouth of the Malacca Strait, which sees 50% of global trade and 90% of Chinese energy imports come through, and can be interdicted by Indian naval presence in the Andaman and Nicobar Island chain. They believe that India will strategically block and contain China east of the Malacca Strait. And this was described by President Hu Jintao in 2003 as China's Malacca dilemma. It also believes that India will take advantage of the US-China rivalry to develop a new sort of relationship with the US and in partnership thwart China's ambition to become a global power. India's proximity to the US therefore becomes a threat multiplier for China. China also believes that the next 10 years, it has a strategic window of opportunity to push into the IOR, as US is distracted with rebuilding their diminished power and influence over the past 4 or 5 years, and this will continue to diminish relatively over the next 5 years or so. India, it considers, a relatively weaker, its economy 1/5 the size of the Chinese, and the army 1/4 its size. Rather than wait till 2030 when India becomes stronger, the right time to strengthen their presence and all their activities in the IOR is right now. But there are key hurdles for China, and they realize this. The first one is that China is not an Indian Ocean country. It does not have territory in the Indian Ocean region. Its passage into the Indian Ocean region can be blocked. The Malacca Straits, as well as the Lombok and Sunda Straits, are straits which can be blockaded. So therefore, it is doing some exercises as to how to fight blockades, etc. Thirdly, US-India partnership to contain China, which China views as Indo-US condominium. I'm using this phrase, which has been borrowed from Gokhale, who spoke the other day in another forum. Now, how does it begin to handle and overcome these hurdles? I've jotted down a few points. First of all, it must distract India's attention from the maritime to the land border. It builds pressure on the land border. There are finite resources that are going into defense. They hope that most of it will go to the army and less will go to the army and the air force for the land border defense and less to the navy. Using economic assistance, political patronage, military assistance to induce smaller countries in India's neighborhood to become a virtual Indian Ocean country and induce these countries to optimize its bilateral relations with some of the littoral countries and thus be accepted by them as a resident power, just like the US has a virtual presence there through alliances and presence of vessels, etc. It also fears passages being blocked, and to overcome this, it's using dual-use infrastructure carefully selected in Chokfu, Hambantota, Gwadar, Seychelles, Djibouti. Chinese believe that they're building close relations with these countries. They can be developed into supply bases for the PLAN overseas operations, and if it comes to a wider conflict. The next point that they're trying to do is to create dissonance and differences in domestic public opinion about what actually the situation of the US vis-a-vis India is. They are actually harping on through their media that India is going to be colonized by the US. It is going to become subservient to the US. It will lose its strategic autonomy if it continues the way it is. It is also getting more proficient in using democracy and tools like free media to manipulate India's public opinion. It also is trying to get India's neighbors concerned about the US-India condominium, which will allow India to become a sub-hegemon, as it puts it. We would recall since 1949, whenever there has been any difference between India and China, they've always looked at the India's periphery and its neighbors and blamed India as a hegemonic power in South Asia. Now it's believed that in concert with the US, India will act even more hegemonic, and therefore it is actually pandering to some of the fear of the neighboring countries, which vis-a-vis India. Now, while Bangladesh, Singapore, and Malaysia and the UAE will not buy into this concern, but countries like Myanmar, Iran, Pakistan, which already have a suspicion of the US, are likely to buy into this. This is something that we really need to work on. And therefore, for India, both Myanmar and Iran are critical in the neighborhood, and we need to be alert about this. China is likely to increase their hydrographic survey and continue to create infrastructure in the region, offer to build military-to-military relationship with these countries in the region, sell arms cheap at friendship prices, routinize their presence of PLAN by frequent visits to ports, conduct joint exercise and patrols in the northern Indian Ocean and places like Iran, Pakistan, etc., so that in a matter of time they can call their increased presence in the region as routine. Now, what is of concern for India as I go into the next phase of my talk about India's options? Concerns with India is really that the Chinese are trying to begin to, in fact, securitize their trade routes and the sea lanes of communications for it.
So, Mr. Krishan Verma, sir, sorry to interrupt, but some of the panelists need to go back. So, I would kindly request you to allow them to speak and then steer the discussion. Sorry for the intervention.
Can I just take 2 minutes on this?
Sure, sir.
All right, I'll close. So, deploy assets to protect their trade, therefore to augment it in the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea, not just the Indian Ocean. China is engaged in hydrographic surveys. We talked about it. And for India, the concern is to try and get China to follow the international rule-based order, which is most unwilling to do. So India's options, I'm just going to put them in 4 bullet points. Press ahead with the Indo-Pacific vision as enunciated by PM Modi. Not get distracted by Chinese moves on the land frontier, not by way of any diminishing importance of land borders, but keep an eye on the maritime domain. Therefore, focus attention on strengthening relations with IORA, the ASEAN, the GCC, Africa, where the Chinese are vulnerable, so as to minimize or reduce the space for China to insert itself into this region. Enhance intra-connectivity in our region, invest in infrastructure development, including islands, and offer, if the littoral countries wish to do so, security for their projects, which can be negotiated bilaterally. Internally, we should strengthen the Navy. We should focus on capital acquisition, ships, underwater vessels, indigenous developments, and marine domain awareness. We should leverage the large number of islands we have and develop jointness in operations, challenge Chinese in the exclusive economic zone, continental shelf, and become net security provider for the region. Let me stop here because for the interest of time. And if I could immediately move on to my distinguished panelists, may I invite the first speaker, Admiral Chatterjee. He has been on the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and he has commanded that. Let me just read out his bio very briefly. Vice Admiral Chatterjee is a submariner. He has commanded 2 submarines, a frigate and a guided missile destroyer, and has held many important staff billets over his checkered service of 40 years. National Defence Academy, Khadakwasla Defence Services Staff College, Wellington, and National Defence College, New Delhi. At mid-career level, he headed the Directorate of Submarine Operations as well as Submarine Acquisitions with the Indian Naval Headquarters. He has served as Flag Officer Submarine as well as Flag Officer commanding Maharashtra and Gujarat area in the aftermath of the 26/11 attack in Mumbai. On being promoted in the rank of Vice Admiral in 2009, he served as Inspector General Nuclear Safety, where he steered the Navy's nuclear submarine program. The Admiral also served as Deputy Chief of the Navy for 2 years. He was thereafter elevated as Commander-in-Chief in June 2014 and commanded the Andaman Nicobar Command, India's only tri-service command, and appointed as an honorary ADC to the President of India. He is a recipient of the now Sena Medal, the Ati Vishesh Seva Medal, and Param Vishesh Seva Medal. Over to you, Admiral Chatterjee.
Sorry. Good afternoon, gentlemen, and thank you, Chair, for that generous introduction and your painting of the entire canvas of the Chinese Navy and the geopolitical and geostrategic aspects of the Indian Ocean. And this panel discussion is on the Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean. Well, I think you have broadly covered most of it, and if there is anything specific you would like to know, I would request you to ask me those questions. But I just want to touch on two issues. Number one is that the enormous speed at which the Chinese Navy is increasing its strength. It's practically almost 3 times the speed as the Indian Navy. And this is something which we have to bridge if we want to, have adequate forces present to thwart the Chinese in the next decade. The issue is that today, even as China has, say, roughly about 90 major vessels and 10 nuclear submarines, it would only be it is the straits, the Malacca Straits, the Sunda Straits, the Lombok, and the Mumbai Straits, which is actually constricting the Chinese Navy to come whole hog into the Indian Ocean. And the most important part is undetected. And that is not possible simply because of the type of satellite surveillance, etc., that we have today, and these, ground-based listening systems, etc., etc. So, as I would see that where we would need to concentrate our efforts, it would be to detect and track the nuclear submarines of the PLA Navy. And that is going to be a tall order unless we are really focused on that. And it would need a 3-dimensional approach, if I would say, from ground-based systems, then to surface surveillance, and then air surveillance, and the 4th dimension of satellite surveillance. So that is going to be a very important aspect. So, as I have said, we are lacking because of our rate of speed of kind of building our warships. We got to catch up. The other thing I would like to tell you is that over the years, the quality of Chinese built warships have also improved. And this, I can say, with my personal experience of visiting some Chinese ships in the countries that, of course, they were given to. Of course, they were the export versions, and I don't think there could be much difference between the export versions and then the ones that they had themselves. So I think I'll restrict myself to this. You have already spoken about the roadsteads, etc., which they have, from where they could launch their ships and turn them around, and should there be a defect rectification, etc., required. Hambantota, as I've I've heard from some of the eminent Sri Lankan panelists and speakers, and they have categorically said that there is no way whatsoever, we are going to allow any Chinese warships to come and use Hambantota, irrespective of how, whatever debt we may have with China. So anyway, these are just statements, but when time comes, we'll see. So I think I'll end with that. And if there are some other questions, please let me know, because I think you have generally covered all aspects that need to be known. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral Chatterjee. I think we'll save the questions and answers towards the end of it, because I think we are running a bit against time. And therefore, and I think you've also comprehensively brought out the issues that actually pertain to our concerns, and perhaps India's options also has been covered by you. So may I just reach out to the next distinguished panelist, which is Air Marshal Varthaman. If I may just give you a brief introduction about his background before I request him to take the floor. He's a postgraduate from the Defense Services Staff College, Wellington. His Chennai-based Air Marshal Varthaman's family has had unbroken service in the IAF since 1943. He has joined Sainik School in 62 and the NDA in 69, commissioned as a fighter pilot in 73. And Air Marshal went on to serve nearly 40 years, flying 4,000 hours in over 40 different types of aircraft. As Chief Test Pilot at ASTE Bangalore, Air Marshal Varthaman has flown most of the fighter, transport and helicopters in service. He commanded a MiG-21 squadron in the Northeast. During the Kargil conflict in 1999, he coordinated aircraft upgradation that proved instrumental in the success of the air campaign. In 2001, he was in command of an operational airbase on the western border when the country was close to war with Pakistan after the terrorist attack on the Indian Parliament. Designated as the air attaché in Paris, Air Marshal Varthaman has had the opportunity to fly the Rafale in 2006. On return to India as Air Vice Marshal, he continued to strengthen ties with Air Force of the world as head of the Air Force Intelligence. Soon after, he was assigned to take over responsibility for the Air Force Modernization Program and long-term plans at Air Headquarters, New Delhi. On promotion to Air Marshal, he was appointed as the Senior Air Staff Officer responsible for air operations with Strategic Central Air Command. Later, he was promoted and appointed Air Force Commanding Chief of Eastern Air Command during a crucial period of the nation's Look East policy. The President of India awarded him the highest military peacetime award of the Param Vishesh Seva Medal for distinguished service of an exceptional order. In addition, he has also been awarded the Ati Vishesh Seva Medal, Vayu Sena Medal, and Vishesh Seva Medal for distinguished service. He retired from the IAF in 2012, but I know he's very current and up to date with all the activities that happen in the strategic domain. So without further ado, let me hand it over to Air Marshal Varthaman for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Verma. I'll just get on with the presentation. Okay, am I audible? Mr. Verma, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Clear.
Oh, and the screen is visible?
Yes, it is. It is very clear.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Verma, for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to be part of this fantastic seminar. I got a very short notice, and Commodore Vasan called me over to talk as a stopgap, and he put me on to work for the next 15-16 hours, where I put this presentation together and listened to most of the presentation in the last 2 days. A superb canvas, a very wide canvas that was covered, and I don't think they have missed out anything else. So when I was hearing it, I said, let me talk about the teeth part of it, because we have seen the security threat that is, and how it is developing, and what we think, what we decipher that China is going to do. So I will restrict myself to the teeth part of it, and that is the Air Force element. My good friend Shankar will come after me and speak about the Army element. The concept note brings out very well. However, due to the political leadership's continental outlook and extended bouts of sea blindness, invaders who came across the sea subjugated us for several centuries. The continental outlook is what I have been through, at least for the 40 years I've been in the Air Force. It has been only Pakistan and China. We never looked down the peninsula. And we came down to the peninsula only when we had to train, when we became instructors. And we trained ab initio boys to learn flying. Otherwise, everything was, operations was only in the north. And all we knew was, majority part of our career was how we liaised with the Army to win the wars in the north. Fortunately for us, the things have changed, and we have started looking south. And looking south, I thought I will just put in the kind of weapon systems that we have generated, what we have, which can threaten the Chinese Navy when it enters our Indian Ocean region. So I thought I'll just cover initially a little bit of the continental threat that was mentioned, then come down to the Chinese maritime threat, only restricting to the weapon systems that can restrict our Air Force operations. Then I'll talk about the Air Force force levels that we have and how much can be committed. And of course, there is one limitation, which is part of this talk. I'll cover that as well. All the information that I'm going to give now is open source information, which is available at most sources. My experience with the Navy has been only in two aspects, and one was when my squadron that I commanded, the 30 Squadron, we affiliated with INS Brahmaputra. That was my first association with in the Indian Navy. This was in 2008. And thereafter, I was very fortunate to spend a day and a half on the USS Nimitz. And I was completely bowled over by the entire city that was sailing in the Indian Ocean. Okay, let's come to the Chinese threat as such. As an Air Force guy, 1962, I always get this question, why you guys were sleeping? Why didn't you all do something? Yes, we did have the capacity to do it. We had the potential to do it. Perhaps we could have changed the result of the 1962 war. That is not, I don't want to exaggerate anything more from it. But all the same, it created a huge stigma in our Indian psyche. And we kept watching the China grow up thereafter. And every time the infrastructure was being built up at a phenomenal speed, every strategist went around talking about the super speed at which China is building. And they covered the technological boom. And every time they kept expanding more and more and more, it only sort of gave us a complex, how are we going to handle China as a warrior? So when I was in the Central Air Command, thereafter when I went to command the East, I started looking, I said, come on, now we got to look at there must be chinks in the armor of the Chinese, and how do we go about handling it? So one guy gets up and says, sir, they built up a beautiful train system from Kinchai to Lhasa, which is at the train travels at 4.5, 4.8 kilometers. You need oxygen to be in the, if you got to be passengers, and these kind of infrastructures and the kind of road systems. So I said, come on, let's pick up the weak links in the communication systems. And very soon we realized that it's no big deal. we can checkmate the Chinese, and thereafter we have to checkmate as well as their 1200 surface-to-surface missiles, which perhaps if I was a Chinese general, I would only launch the surface-to-surface missiles instead of sending my aircraft. So how do we handle that? So this was the continental threat that we all got used to. And we found that air power can beautifully support the ground forces in checkmating the Chinese. And the air power being in a very offensive arm, we can really play up, play up a lot of damage deep inside the Chinese territory. Now, that was the continental threat. So let's come down to the maritime threat. Many aspects of this maritime threat have been touched upon in the various talks that we had. And once they come into the Indian Ocean region, what kind of a threat could affect us? For me, as an Air Force fighter pilot, I look at firstly any threat from the air. Secondly, I look at threats which can be, the surface-to-air missiles on board on board ships that can threaten me. So when we look at the ships that are available, we find that they have got two carriers, the LIAONING, which was covered, and the second carrier, which is the SHANDONG. Now, on board the LIAONING carrier and the SHANDONG is the J-15 carrier-borne aircraft. That aircraft is from the Su-27 family, a very heavy platform, extremely heavy platform. Because of its weight and the ski jump which it uses, it really cannot get airborne with its full warload as well as the full fuel. So therefore, the armament weapons which he is going to come up in the air and counter us is going to be limited, one. Secondly, he is going to have very limited endurance, basically because he is not carrying enough fuel. So recently, they have gone into something called the buddy refueling. So you have another J-15 airborne from the carrier, which is hovering in the, which is orbiting in the air. So this attack aircraft J-15 gets airborne, tanks up with the aircraft in orbit, takes the fuel from that as a buddy, and thereafter extends its range. That is one aspect. And the other thing is they just got about 15 to 20 of them. There are no further orders for the J-15. And there is a talk that there is going to be a J-15 upgrade, which they call the J-15B, which is likely to come up. And that's in a distant future. So as far as an airborne threat is concerned, when the Chinese Navy comes into the Indian Ocean region, is going to be nothing very credible at all to threaten the Indian Air Force. And there is another carrier under construction, which they call today as the 003, which perhaps will be a much bigger carrier and have different launch systems other than the ski jump which you see here. The two carriers are here, the LIAONING and the SHANDONG. I don't expect, in my assessment, I don't expect that to enter the Indian Ocean region for a long time to come. As you all know, the LIAONING is a very old carrier, which was built by Soviet Russia. It used to be called the, I think it was called the Riga. And thereafter, the Ukrainians, after the Soviet Union split, called it the Varyag. And the Chinese bought this as almost like scrap, built on it, and that's the LIAONING. The SHANDONG is a brand new carrier. The talks from the Chinese are, the Chinese are planning to make 10, maybe even 15 carriers, but that's very, very, very in the distant future. They are also planning to have stealth aircraft airborne from the carrier, because if they want to think that they can counter the US Navy carriers, which operates the F-35 stealth, they thought, they believe that they also need the stealth. But once again, that's at least another 15 years away before weaponized stealth aircraft gets airborne from a Chinese carrier. So against these kind of assets, what do we have? What does the Indian Air Force come up with? Basically, we have a few dedicated maritime strike squadrons. The 6th Squadron, which is used to be based in Pune, now it's in Jamnagar. It's a Jaguar Maritime Strike Squadron, which has flown with the Navy for perhaps the last 30-40 years. In the last 30-40 years, the Jaguar has been upgraded in the recent past. It's in a very well upgraded form with a brand new Israeli radar and a new anti-ship missile, which I will talk about. The Su-30 MKI, they have one dedicated squadron, 30 Squadron in Pune, my old squadron, which is based in Pune, and there's a lot of flying with the Western Naval Fleet. It has anti-ship weapons. Recently, considering the threat which is developing in the peninsula, the Air Force Station THANJAVUR was created, and we raised the very first Su-30 MKI squadron, 222 Squadron in THANJAVUR. This was just not even 6 months ago. It is now operational in the peninsula, and it gives a wide area of both sides of the coastline where it can operate. The Rafale, which has been recently inducted and it's in Ambala, has its own anti-ship missile, which I will talk about, is one of the deadliest missiles. What are the bases? The operational air bases that we have are one in the Car Nicobar, which in the Nicobar Islands, which we call the Car Nicobar, and you can see that it straddles very close to the Straits of Malacca. Here is Car Nicobar, and any of our fighter, including the Jaguar, which operates from it, can threaten any of the ships that are exiting out of the Straits of Malacca. The other, this is the aerial view of the beautiful looking Car Nicobar Air Base. The other air base which I mentioned just now is the Thanjavur Air Base. The first one in Tamil Nadu with a fighter. I mean, actually, it's the second. The first one is Sulur, which has 2 Tejas squadrons. The Maritime Squadron is in Thanjavur, and you can see what a beautiful location it is. It can actually monitor the entire the IOR, and considering the range of the Su-30, it has got a phenomenal reach. Notwithstanding the 2 dedicated air bases which I mentioned about, there are so many other bases close in the peninsula area and a little upper peninsula. That is, of course, the naval base at Arakonam, Chennai, Trivandrum, Cochin, Goa, Vizag, Kalaikunda, which is near Calcutta, Pune, Jamnagar, Bhuj, and Nalia. All these bases are capable of handling the fighters which I have just mentioned now. When the Thanjavur Air Base was opened to 222 Squadron, this is the recent inauguration. You can see the Chief of Defense Staff, the Chief of Air Staff, and the Chief of Naval Staff. The 222 Squadron is armed with the BRAHMOS, and this BRAHMOS is the anti-ship version. I will just talk about it in the next slide. It's called the Tiger Shark Squadron, and it's going to be one of the fulcrum squadrons in the south for in the near future. Now, it is not only the weapons that we talk about, the fighters that we have, which can be the lethal teeth, which can deter the Chinese fleets. We need to have sufficient transport aircraft which can take the Indian Army to wherever the area which is threatened for rapid mobilization. The C-17 Globemaster, which is on the top left, is the world's largest military aircraft in the world. And today we hold the distinction of having the second largest C-17 fleet in the world. The first one is the US Air Force, and we are the second. We have a very large fleet, and there is no place on this planet where the Globemaster cannot reach. The other cargo aircraft we have is the IL-76, an old 35-40-year-old Russian aircraft, which has actually been the workhorse in the transport fleet. It operates out of Car Nicobar, and of course it is based in Chandigarh, basically for the Leh support. But the IL-76 can operate out of Car Nicobar. The recent induction includes the C130J Hercules, which needs very short strips. That means many strips in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands will be accessed to the C130, just not Car Nicobar or Port Blair. It can carry 20 tons of warload. It's basically a commando aircraft for rapid deployment of the Army commandos for extraction of any of our citizens who are kidnapped. The other aircraft, which has been a workhorse, it's a medium transport aircraft, can just carry about 5 tons, is the AN-32. You all be familiar. And daily there is an AN-32 which flies out of Madras to Car Nicobar and back almost every day. So this is actually a supply line to support the Andamans. We also have an excellent helicopter fleet, the Chinook, which is again the largest military helicopter in the world today. We have quite a number of these Chinooks. Inter-island movement, between commando movements and support to the land and naval forces. The Chinook is an exceptional aircraft. And we have more than 100 Mi-17 V5, which is one of the most modern helicopters in the Mi-17 family, which has been inducted in the last 10 years. Capable of night penetrations in bad weather, so capable of all weather operations. So we have adequate fighter strength, we have adequate transports and helicopter fleet to support and to jointly deter the Chinese Navy into our IOR. Most of our flying in terms of the maritime interdiction is through the Navy Dornier 228 and Boeing P-8I Neptune. The anti-ship weapons I needed to cover. The anti-ship weapons which we have is the Jaguar has the AGM-84L, it's Harpoon. Its range is more than 100 kilometers. So it can, the Jaguar can fly 300 nautical miles out of Port Blair, out of Car Nicobar, and able to launch at 100 kilometers distance on any ship. And the Harpoon is a US anti-ship missile made by Honeywell. The Su-30, when we inducted it along with the X-31A anti-ship missile. Again, it's got a range more than 100 kilometers. All our Sukhois are capable of carrying the anti-ship missile, the X-31A. The recent induction has been the BRAHMOS. It's been in the news all over. You can see the various type of attack patterns it can follow. For instance, trying to hit a aircraft carrier, which is the juiciest target for any fighter pilot, and he perhaps dreams to hit an aircraft carrier. And you can hit where it's vulnerable. Instead of hitting it below the bow line, you can hit it from the top, and you can tune the BRAHMOS to hit it in any manner. Likewise, all the anti-ship missiles can be done in a similar manner. The BRAHMOS triad, all of you know about it. We have the air triad, we have the army operated from land, then we have ship launched as well as the submarine launched. The Su-30, here is the Su-30 carrying out the BRAHMOS trial, the anti-ship one. It's a very huge missile. It's 2.5 tons. It's almost 7 meters long. It's a very heavy missile and has ranges up to 300 kilometers. The circular error probability, that means what is the error it could have, the CEP is just 1 meter. So it can hit exactly where you've chosen. Maximum, it will miss the target by 1 meter. Here you can see the BRAHMOS test missile being launched by the Sukhoi. The Rafale comes with the AM-39 EXOCET anti-ship missile. This is a much later generation. You can see it being carried in the belly. It's a very large missile. And the AM-39 EXOCET family is very proud to have in the past. It's got a rich history. It sank the HMS Sheffield in the Falkland Islands conflict. It hit the Glamorgan. It almost sank the Atlantic conveyor and also hit the USS Stark. which was heavily damaged and was listing. The Rafale is armed to the teeth, and the kind of weapon systems that it has, it's not only the anti-ship missile that you have to look at. We have enough destructive power, both on the Sukhois, the Rafale, which can really threaten the Chinese Navy. Finally, coming to one limitation which I wanted to mention here, all the limitations revolve around the endurance and the reach of our fighter aircraft. The Sukhoi 30, for instance, can fly for 10 hours. If you give it fuel, it can fly non-stop from Delhi to London. It can reach London in 10 hours' time. But however, it needs an aerial tanker to fuel it in the air. So basically, if you needed to fly to the coast of Somalia, hit and come back, it will need tanking somewhere over the Arabian Sea on the outbound and inbound. So we are heavily dependent, if we want to hit the max ranges, we are heavily dependent on the tanker. Here is the IL-78 tanker, which we have 6 only of them, and we don't have any more tankers. And if we have a conflict which is threatening us both in the north and in the IOR, then we are going to be critically short of the aerial tanker. So the last 15 to 20 years, in fact, I was involved in it. We have tried desperately to get tankers. For some reason or other, it has been stalled. And I recently read in the paper that we are likely to hire tankers till we buy them in the future. As you all know, many air forces, like for instance the Royal Air Force, hires tankers. It doesn't operate the tankers even in war. It hires them, and it doesn't have the headache of maintaining and operating them. So this is one option which the Indian Air Force is likely to choose. The Defense Procurement Procedure, understand, permits hiring. So this is likely to happen, and this limitation may not exist. I finish with my presentation. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, Marshal Vartman. I think it gives us a lot of confidence in the prowess of the Indian Air Force to be able to hold our own. But of course, I also sensed that you were warning us that we shouldn't get into complacency. And I think we are continuing to develop our prowess in this region. Thank you very much for a very comprehensive presentation in a short time.
Thank you.
May I now reach out to my third distinguished panelist, Lieutenant General P.R. Shankar, PVSM, AVSM, VSM, the former Director General Artillery and now Professor of the Aerospace Department, IIT Madras. He was a retired Director General of Artillery. He's an alumnus of the National Defense Academy, Khadakwasla, Defense Services Staff College, Wellington, Army College, Mao, Naval Postgraduate School, Monterrey, and National Defense College, New Delhi. He has held many important command, staff, and instructional appointments in the Army. He has vast operational experience, having served in all kinds of terrain and operational situations, which has confronted the Indian Army in the past 4 decades. He gave great impetus to the modernization of artillery through indigenization. 155 mm gun projects like the Dhanush, the M77 ULH, the Sharang and K9 Vajra, as also rocket and missile projects related to Pinaka, BRAHMOS, and Grad BM21 were some of his success. He has deep knowledge, understanding, and experience to successful defense planning and acquisition, spanning over a decade. The General Officer is now a professor at the Aerospace Department of Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, Chennai, and is actually actively involved in applied research, and of course, prolific in writing about strategic issues, which we love reading practically every day. Thank you very much and for being here, and over to you. The floor is yours, General.
Thanks a lot once again, Mr. Verma, for that nice introduction. And it gives me great pleasure to share stage with Admiral Chatterjee, with whom I'm connecting up after a long time. I last met him in his command in Andaman Nicobar when I went for the BRAHMOS trials. And it also gives me great pleasure to follow up with Air Marshal Vartman's excellent presentation on Indian capabilities as how to dominate the Indian Ocean. We've heard a lot about what China does and what everything, and how it's going to be the next superpower and things like that. Today, that was a general theme. At the outset, I have a contra view about China. Despite all that it said and done, there are a lot of gaps in China. And that's what we need to focus on. Notwithstanding that, I'll go through a short presentation on China's maritime presence in the Indian Ocean and India's options. We all know that China desires to be a superpower, and it needs a two-ocean access. It needs access to the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. If you go into the history of superpowers, that's what it has been. You look at America, it has Pacific and the Atlantic. The Britishers had the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. Right? So that's how it is. It needs it. But then, if it has to be a superpower, there are certain issues which China has to do. It has to have full control over the South China Sea, which it still doesn't have. Though it's made the first thing with the 9-dash line and the militarizing the islands there. BRI and CPEC have to be successful. Pakistan, CPEC, reaching out to the warm waters of the Gulf. It's a must. India has to be contained by the string of pearls. We've spoken enough of it. USA has to be sidelined. USA has to be driven away from this area. It has to have considerable presence in the IOR. Someone did speak of the Malacca dilemma, Mr. Verma. It has to get across the Malacca Strait. Where else? It is already developing a major base at Gwadar. Plus, it needs one in Maldives, Hambantota, or Kaikapu. Of course, it's got its military base at Djibouti. These are the preconditions for which China can come and dominate the IOR and be a superpower. Anything less than that is of no value for the kind of investment it is putting in. Now, let's look at what China can do or happening. In the post-COVID phase, its economy is recovering. At this point, I might like to tell you, all what we heard about China in the past 10, 15 years, its development, everything, COVID has changed the stage a bit. It's actually flattened the world as never before. And it is from here we have to rebuild things. And you have to look at a new dimension from here on. It's given us a chance. Its economy is recovering. There's no doubt about it. Its navy is expanding. A lot of people have spoken about it. It's set to have the largest navy in a few years, overtaking the number of vessels which USA has. It has started solidifying Tibet and Xinjiang. Well, this is critical. One must understand why Xi Jinping went all the way where he went and spoke of solidification of Tibet and Xinjiang. That's their weak area. That's their backyard. And that's the backyard which is restive, non-Han. A huge backyard, which USA started targeting. Because so are we. Because it's put Hong Kong in its pocket. So one less problem. But then Hong Kong has not died out. The recent RCEP gives it strength. That's one side of the story. Let's look at it the other side. PLA is tied down in eastern Ladakh along the LAC today, which it never expected. 6 to 8 divisions are tied down along the LAC. I would say more. And this situation, as it goes, is unlikely to ease. Remember, the Guangdong incident took 8 years to normalize. And even after that, the Chinese are still there. So if the situation doesn't ease, China can't pull out troops from there. If it can't pull out troops from there, it can't, keep expanding into the seas. There's an entropy about the Chinese armed forces. If you actually analyze the entire PLA, PLAF, PLAGF, PLA-RF and PLA Navy, you will see it is the same amount of people who are being shifted from one into the other. Right. So, though it has reduced PLA, now with its renewed commitment, it has to rethink. Someone said it wants to tie us down by, a continental outlook. It has to go continental from here on. It just can't. Till now, it had a secure rear base. It doesn't have anymore. Now, solidification of Tibet imposes resource constraint. There was a Belfer Center study out of Harvard, I think, which said that the net forces of PLA in Tibet and the LAC were less than what India had along its India-China border. But now with the situation what it is, it needs more. Okay, let's look at this. What happened in if you see in the past 7-8 months, the PLA Navy has not left the coastline. It has been contained there. And the USA is not going to vanish. So if someone says he's going to come out all the way here and operate his 1.5 carriers in the next 15 years, I think Air Marshal Martman will be very happy because the THANJAVUR base will get operationalized and get some kills also. It's called Tiger Sharks after all. So it's not going to vanish. Okay. Now, we also need to understand overall the CPEC and BRI are struggling. For it to pick up, get back the political clout to dominate world institutions is going to be a big ask. Right? Every day you see reports coming out of Pakistan for and against the CPEC. I'm talking of ground level situation in Pakistan. And if it doesn't reach the Gwadar and the CPEC doesn't come through, a lot of its gambits will fail. Now let's look at it internally. The virus persists. Its effects are going to last. It's not going to run away. Its economy has been affected by the worst floods in the past 40-50 years. The Yangtze Basin and the inland water transport has been badly affected. And it's going to have downstream effects, which we don't know because nothing comes out of China. And it's going through isolation. And I think a lot of people are pretty clear as to how to deal with China hereafter. So it's not going to have a free run. If it's going to have an RCP with 4.5 Asian countries and ASEAN, and if it becomes a world power, it cannot happen. There's a world opinion which is going against China, politically. Notwithstanding there's a change of guard in the USA between Biden and Trump. It's a life struggle for USA itself. Lack of experience. I think this is coming out very, very, very clearly that the Chinese have that much and can do no more. Last year, or take your mind back to Doklam, when the Indian Army stood up to Doklam, to the PLA in Doklam, everyone said, what's going to happen? Initially, when Galwan happened, they said, look, we're going to get hit. There are a lot of stories about how, the Chinese are going to come and steamroll us. Where are they now? Stuck. In fact, the international opinion is slowly turning around to the fact that China is not so great. Its limitations have been exposed. Taiwan has out of reach. 1 month back, every second day, every newspaper coming out of China and every newspaper in that ASEAN region said how China is going to attack Taiwan when the presidential elections are on. Gone. You don't hear of it. Taiwan is still there. Now the Quad is coming up with a free and open Indian Ocean strategy. Now France and Germany have come out with their own strategies. It's very clear. They're not. China is not going to get given a free run into these areas. So it's just not India's game. There's something beyond India, right? I don't think it can exert influence in the IOR in the foreseeable future. It will have to redraw its plans. You can't have a country which is fighting at the rear gate in Ladakh and then it wants to fight in the front gate and with its center unstable. With Mongolia also having problems. Right, what is India's interest in this area? There's no doubt. This has already been, long back, Mr. Manmohan Singh, when he was the Prime Minister, very clearly said, India should be the dominant maritime power in its security environment from the Persian Gulf to the Malacca Straits. And if you have to be a regional power, you should have the courage to go across. which we already started doing. Right? So what are India's options? Very clear. We need to tie down and hold China on the land border through IAF and Indian Army, which are today, in the given environment, decidedly more superior to the PLA. There's no doubt about it. We need to make China and Pakistan look inwards. Tibet, Xinjiang, Balochistan, Gilgit, the whole works. This collusivity you break, make both these of them start looking inwards, threaten CPEC, China will come to, it will not enter IOR. I have no doubt about it. We need to build our neighborhood. This came out. In fact, Mr. Verma very beautifully put out. Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Nepal, Maldives. Just to amplify, how can you have two neighbors in, say, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka having Chinese weapons for their army? And you don't give your own. I think we need to rethink, redraw our own strategy. Because we need to build our partnerships, whether it's a one-to-one partnership with USA, Australia, Japan, Quad, France, Germany, Indonesian, IRA, ASEAN. You have to counter China strategically. You need to strengthen island territories. I think Admiral Chatterjee spoke a lot about it earlier when he spoke in the afternoon and now also. And we discussed it. How about Lakshadweep? You know, the islands in the IO are like pivots of maneuver in deserts. You hold them and, you know, you can't be shaken out. Of course, you need to build up your Navy, whether you want to go carrier base or a sub base. I think we need to have open debate about it. And personally, I feel within the Navy itself, there are divided opinions. At the national level, we have other issues. Our economy has to rebuild. So all these issues, if you put together, I don't think we will have to take a back foot. In fact, we need to be on the front foot. Right? And with all my interaction which I've had with US people and Australians and everyone, they feel that India has a very critical role to play in containing China and keeping China out of the Indian Ocean region. With this, I have finished. If any questions, I'll take them on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Shankar. I think it was again a very comprehensive, very insightful and thoughtful presentation. I think it does bring out every issue that we had in this topic. So let me just not try and summarize what has been said by the three distinguished panelists, but let's go to the Q&A and see if there are any questions that need to be sent to us. Is Aishwarya there? She was looking at that, or is there anything in the chat box I haven't seen there?
Yes, sir. Just so some of the questions were answered by the panelists themselves. So should I read the new one that just came in?
Yes, please.
Yes.
And who is it addressed to?
This question is addressed to Lieutenant General P.R. Shankar, and it's asked by Mr. Danesh Sankyayan. The question reads: BRAHMOS is increasing its range. Can it be ranged up 800 kilometers? Will India put its own missiles in S-400 apart from 40 N6E?
What's that? Look, the BRAHMOS today, the standard BRAHMOS has a range of about 290 kilometers. I think we fired the 400 plus kilometer BRAHMOS. As days go by, we will have longer range BRAHMOS. That's given. Rather than having a longer range BRAHMOS, I would prefer that India develops a hypersonic system, which we already demonstrated. And plus, we just saw Air Marshal Vartaman giving out those beautiful photographs of a Sukhoi mounted with a BRAHMOS. Now, once a Sukhoi, you can fly from here to London, and from there another 400 kilometers, you are halfway into Atlantic. So we have these capabilities. I am not, minor issues, I think. And we put our act together, which we are. BRAHMOS, when I started my career, I wouldn't say, when I started seeing BRAHMOS, when I commissioned the first BRAHMOS into the Regiment of Artillery, it just had one regiment. Today we have 5-6 regiments of them. The Navy has got BRAHMOS, the Air Force has got BRAHMOS. And then very often we tend to underestimate ourselves, right, as a nation. This is something which I somehow have never understood. We are pretty strong. I have no this thing. And Admiral Chatterjee will agree with me. It was in his tenure that I went and fired BRAHMOS there. And the next day I reported to him. And I'll confirm what Air Marshal Vartaman said, 1 meter. 1 meter, I have seen it fire with the accuracy of 1 meter. Not on one day, on 2 consecutive days. Right? So I think I am sanguine about it.
Any other question?
Yes, sir. Another question, it's addressed to Vice Admiral Chatterjee, and it's asked by C3S Atreya. Besides the populated islands in Andaman and Nicobar, is there one where a free port like Singapore can be developed?
Well, this is a question which has been going through my mind all along my tenure in the Andamans. If you were present for my the session when I spoke about the Andaman Islands and the salience of Andamans, I compared the islands, the entire chain of Andaman Nicobar, to have 6 major islands. And where I said that, the northernmost was just about 1.2 the size of Singapore. Then the next one, which is just south of that, was twice the size. And then the one which is south of that was 1.2 times the size. And the smallest island of the Andaman chain was just about the same size of Singapore. And the Great Nicobar was again 1.2 times the size of Singapore. So, you have so many Singapores available there. And I'm sure by the turn of this century, at least 1 or 2 would become, will become economic hubs. Today, the government spends about roughly 6,000 crores in Andamans just to, to keep the islands running annually. Now, Andaman has to generate its own funds for development, and the only way, the starting point is, in my mind, is investing in defense infrastructure. Because what happens in defense infrastructure? The roads start getting built, and things which, let's say, a private entrepreneur is looking at, a private investor is looking at, are these basic essentials. So, it's a big catalyst for economic growth and development for us. So I think I've given you a pretty long answer to a very short question, but certainly it can happen, and it will happen. You mark my words, because if we don't do it, we will suffer, and then we will do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. I don't know how we are doing for time. Can we take a question or 2 more, or do you want us to conclude?
Yeah, I think we could wind up because I think people are leaving. So maybe you could, yes.
Yeah, okay. Then I think I'll just do the honors of thanking my distinguished panelists for very comprehensive presentations. I think we've been able to highlight the Chinese presence in the IOR and what their plans and ambitions for the future are. I think there was a note of caution which was rightly sounded that they are really not superpower in that sense of the word, that we need to be worried about or anxious about their presence in the region. I think we are already taking enough countermeasures by way of in defense of our own improvement in capacity and capability building, as well as also working with other democracies and in the region to be able to make it more multipolar so that we're able to actually defend the interests that we all need to have, which is ensure free lanes of communication, the proper use of global commons, and nobody actually aggrandises territory in the region or impedes or puts hurdles in the form of trade or energy routes. And the sea lanes of communications are left absolutely secure. I think that's the major idea. And I think India would look at a multipolar presence in the region. We welcome that, as long as it was peaceful means and international rule-based order. With these few comments, let me thank the host once again for inviting all of us and my distinguished panelists for their excellent presentation. I think I did learn a lot from it. Thank you very much, and let me hand it over to Mr. Nair.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Krishan Verma, for sharing that that panel discussion, and also for holding us all till the end with some very interesting insights, right from your talk itself. Your sort of introduction, it went on, and these are some subjects where people who are interested can listen for a long while. Thank you so much. And also our thanks to Vice Admiral Chatterjee, of course Air Marshal Varthaman and Lieutenant General Shankar for being there and of course giving a wonderful insight. A special thanks, of course, to Air Marshal Varthaman, because he took up this task, if I might call it, at the very last moment. It's been very gracious of you to do that. I know it's difficult, and you yourself mentioned that you spent so many hours putting this together, but it was a wonderful presentation, and my special thanks to you. And of course, Commodore Vasan and the team. Thank you so much. So thank you all very much, gentlemen. I think we'll move on to listen to Mr. Heblika. Is he there, Mr. Pratap Heblika, who of course might not need much of an introduction, but for those here who might not know him too well, Mr. Heblika is the former Special Secretary to the Government of India and is currently, of course, the Managing Trustee of the Institute of Contemporary Studies, Bangalore. He's been decorated for meritorious service and distinguished service by the Government of India, and he has been associated, of course, with several universities here in India and abroad, of course, talking about national security and related issues, including the University of Manipal and the National Institute of Advanced Studies, etc. So, and I must also add that if it wasn't for Mr. Heblika, we might not had some of these conferences at all, because it all started 10 years ago when Mr. Heblika and Mr. Chengappa visited the office of the Deccan Herald, where I was in a meeting with one of the directors there. And it was then, I think it was 2010 or 11, that this whole thing came up of the Press Institute of India getting associated with the Institute of Contemporary Studies, Bangalore, to host seminars like this for journalists. And of course, we did do a lot on that front over the years, both here in Madras and in Bangalore. But those were all physical meetings, which at the end of the day, I might add, is a lot more pleasure, because you get to meet people, you get to shake hands, and you can see the actual smiles instead of looking at people on the screen. But then now in COVID times, I think they're not doing too badly either. So over to Mr. Heblika for summing up, and of course for the vote of thanks.
Thanks, Shashi. As we bring down the curtain on 2 days of hectic listening to people from different fields, I think it has been a wonderful 2-day session. When we started this discussion on deciphering China, the aim was to create an awareness about what China is, what was the national security interests of the Chinese Communist Party, what were its objectives, and how was it trying to articulate this in its own way. About 40 years ago, as Krishan and I would know, we had little access to open information on China. And as a result, we had tremendous difficulties in trying to interpret what was happening in that country. And we had to depend upon our own resources to address these situations. But today, We are on the other side of the coin. You have so much of information with us that we need to sift through to make it, to make ourselves understand what is the truth, what is fact, what is fiction, and what is it that is being bandied in the open market for us to read and get confused. So the intention was to create awareness about the Chinese Communist Party and how it intends to build itself into a bigger power than what it is today. And where does India stand? What are the threats and challenges that India needs to see from a diplomatic point of view, from a political point of view, from the military point of view? And how does it all end up in one matrix? Are we strong, or are we trying to deprecate ourselves because we don't know our strengths? And where do we go from here? I think that was the aim of the entire 4-part webinar, and I think we have been able to obtain the objectives of this particular webinar. There are a number of takeaways. The strength of the webinar, this webinar, lay in the fact that we had 32 resource persons or speakers, excluding the 2 gentlemen who were the top when we started yesterday, and today's validity excluded. We had 32 resource persons. We spoke in 8 sessions plus 1 panel discussion. We had 16 representatives from the Navy who gave us a vast idea of what the maritime context was. And in this connection, I would just draw attention to what my colleague, Commodore Uday Rao, had always been telling me, that this country is so lacking in understanding what's happening in the maritime domain, both in the government and in the civil sector, that we need to focus the torch and make it people understand what we are missing out. And I think to that point, both Uday and I are perhaps happy that we have created awareness among the community. Of the 32, we had 16 officers from the Navy, 1 from the Army, 1 from the Air Force, and the rest were former civil servants, members of the academic community, people came from the science and technology side, and from the R&D. I think we had a good mix, and we had people who brought about the subject addressed it in very, very diverse but very dedicated manner. The other thing which I would like to focus is, if we, in this country, we have been very shy of getting onto a platform to address, as a matter of public policy, what our national defense policy is, what our national security policy is, what are our interests, and what are our objectives. Tomorrow, I think we would like to see some of our political, masters stand up on the platform and tell us what is India's, national security objectives or national security interests. Like China says, it won't discuss the future of Tibet. It won't discuss the future of Taiwan. Now Hong Kong is in its pocket for keeps. It does not discuss trade. It does not want to discuss the devaluation of the yuan. I think Chinese have stated their national interests very, very clearly. I think we should be in a position with a comprehensive economic strength to tell the world that what are our interests and our objectives. We don't have a national security doctrine as yet. And without this, we are not focused on the way we are headed. What we have discussed today shows that, yes, we are coming to a convergence of ideas where we should have a comprehensive policy that dictates our strategic outlook. Now, for example, a few days ago, the Delhi-based magazine, the Bharat Shakti, had its 5th annual conference for defense attaches of countries accredited to India, where you had the Chief of Defense Staff, the Air Force Chief, and the Navy Chief telling us what they thought about the certain areas of the industry partnership with the defense establishment. We require more such platforms where people understand that, yes, India means that it is strong, India means business, and India wants to take things ahead. The 4th leg of this particular webinar was to create awareness among people who do not have access to this kind of information, either on a periodical basis or on a regular basis. I think, for example, students, academics, research scholars, think tanks, need to understand that there is so much information available within us that once we bring it onto the same platform, that we're able to develop a comprehensive, cohesive picture. So I think to that point, our webinars, we had two earlier. One was to understand the cybersecurity strengths of China and how does India stand vis-a-vis that. And also the first one, which is a curtain raiser, when we talked about the comparative national security strategies of both India and China and how we are today in the present context. So in that direction, I think we've had 3 webinars. The fourth one, which comes sometime later, we'll talk about China's media landscape, how the Chinese Communist Party of China uses the media to further its own objectives or interest. So having said all this, I think we have achieved what we set out to do. And I think having listened to some very, very senior professionals in the civil and military field, one is reassured that India is in the right direction. We may have lost out a 10 or 15 years in the race, but I'm sure eventually we will get there because India's strength lies in its own technology, and we have to bring it to bear on some of the policies that we need to follow. And I think that would be something that I would be writing about in the next couple of days. We wanted to do this on the 26th of November because it was dedicating the webinar to those martyrs who fell on this, who were fighting 12 years ago in Mumbai. And again, this comes ahead of the Navy week. Within a week from now, at least now, the maritime context in that sense becomes more important to people who will see what's happening in the newspapers when India celebrates the Navy week. Having said this, I would like to now take on the second responsibility given by Shashi. I would like to thank 5 youngsters who've been part of this team, 2 from Bangalore and 3 from Chennai. 2 from Bangalore are the ones who came in at the last moment when we wanted to have a plan B in case we had to shift it from Chennai to Bangalore. So I would thank Anantalakshmi and Pravina from Christ University for being our backup. Again, Bala, then Aishwarya and Mr. Nayar's colleague who held the fort in Chennai. I think they have worked pretty hard in the last several weeks to make this thing happen so well. And above all, I would like to thank each and every speaker, named or unnamed today, for having spared his valuable time. There's a saying when I was posted in Seychelles, when we set up the Seychelles Military Academy, the Defense Academy, we had a Captain Arun Madan, who was our defense advisor in Tanzania and Dar es Salaam. He used to say, when you sit in the evening and remember the good things you did and the good things you're going to do. I think I take forward Arun's advice. I think we have done a tremendous job in the last 2 days, and all those who have spared their valuable time have also done it in the case of a national interest. This is the, we did this not as a paid webinar, but unpaid. It is our corporate social responsibility to the people and the younger generation of this country. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having joined us in this celebration of the webinar on maritime context. We hope by next year we will be able to build on it and bring out more dimensions of the same subject. Thank you very much. God bless and Jai Hind.